life, he knows how to manage the number of lives here on earth. I don't believe we have to help him. God then established a different relationship with the animal kingdom. Whereas before, man and animals, especially on the ark, we notice, had lived in a peaceful coexistence. Now, they have a predator-prey relationship. God now added animals to man's food chain. And this was probably because the ecological changes which occurred after the flood made it less productive agriculturally. God gave man permission to eat meat, with the stipulation that it was not to be eaten raw. That was a precaution, I'm sure, for disease prevention, which easily spreads through parasites in uncooked meat, or diseases which are contained in blood. And of course, they lacked refrigeration at that time, so they had to be especially cautious. Not eating blood, not eating raw meat would also prevent the destruction of animals as waste, as God now demanded an accounting from every animal. Man was now reaffirmed as the steward over all lower forms of life, to use them in a way that reflects their usefulness, the order and the beauty and the purpose of its creator. God then established accountability for man for the life of other men. We read in chapter 9, verse 6, whoever sheds men's blood by man, his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God, he made man. You know, as a Christian, that the life of every person is inherently precious and cannot be taken or without giving an account to God. And this was a new command. Remember, Cain killed Abel, but God didn't demand his life. Nor from Lamech, who bragged about his murderous exploits, but now God gave everyone protection from others by saying essentially, if you kill someone, you'll pay for it with your own life. This lays down, for even until today, the principle of capital punishment as law, to protect the weaker from the stronger. In its original languages, the Bible makes a distinction between killing and murder. Not all killing is murder, because there are cases when there is a just cause for killing, such as self-defense or capital punishment with due process, or killing in a just war. There are other instances where killing is accidental. At that point, God did not demand a life for that. It would not have been required for an accidental death. Then we see in Genesis 9, chapter 9, verses 18 to 17, that God then established his covenant with Noah and all of his descendants and every living creature on earth, that he will never drown the world in a universal flood. This was an important promise to Noah, who would have a panic attack every time he saw rain clouds from now on. From now on, rain would be a common and necessary occurrence. In the new post-flood world, the water cycle would constantly recycle that rainwater on the earth. Water is a necessity, and there would be local storms and hurricanes and floods. But here is the sign that that rain is temporary. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of a covenant between me and the earth. This rainbow, as Mike pointed out, represents God's victory, a victory of grace over judgment. Now, scientifically, a rainbow is an arc of concentric colored bands that develops when the sunlight interacts with water drops. The sunlight is refracted as it enters the raindrop, and it causes different wavelengths of visible light. Every time we see a rainbow, we remember God's faithfulness in every one of his promises. Well, one thing did not drown in the flood, and that was sin. Sin was riding in the ark. It was in the nature of Noah, his wife, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their 3 wives, and through them, sin survived the flood. It was a new earth, but it was the same old human nature. And when Noah and his family left the ark, sin stepped into the new world with them. As we read the story, Noah drank too much of the wine that he produced from his own vineyard, and as he lay in a drunken stupor inside his tent, his son Ham exposed their father's nakedness to his brothers. This was a serious breach of the family ethic and made a mockery of Noah's leadership. Noah's dignity as a man of God and his sense of decency were compromised within his family. Shem and Japheth had an appropriate sense of shame and attempted to rectify the damage. For this, they and their descendants are blessed, even as their brother Ham and his descendants were cursed. Noah was a preacher of righteousness, the New Testament says, and he preached for 120 years while he was building the ark, and he must have had a lot to say. He preached to all of those who watched him and probably chided him and derided him. But we have no record of those words. Instead, we only have recorded in Scripture the first and only thing that Noah ever said in Genesis 9:25, and it was this: "Cursed be Canaan. The lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers," before he added the blessing for Shem and Japheth. He prophesied that Canaan, the son of Ham, would be their slaves. This prophecy for enslavement of the sons of Ham in no way condones slavery as it was practiced in the ancient world, the enlightened world, and even today. Although enslavement was sometimes an act of judgment, as in the case with Israel's captivity in Babylon, most of the time it resulted from man's lack of recognition that all men are created equal in the eyes of God. Noah's oracle as patriarch of his family is common among several of those whom we will meet this year in Genesis. He predicts the future of his sons without actually knowing how his words will be played out in history. Canaan, the son of Ham, would later become the father of the Near Eastern peoples, most of whom were conquered by Joshua when Israel took the promised land. They would continually oppose the Shemites, whose family line we will see more of in next week's lesson. As a conquered people, the sons of Ham would be in servitude to the descendants of their cousins. They would struggle with the consequences of their own degradation and poor choices to come in the future. And we will be watching how their struggles and their enslavement play out as we study Genesis this year. In chapter 10, we see a little bit of Genesis's thematic development rather than its chronological development. We see the lines of Japheth and Shem and Ham, and we see that the sons of Shem and the sons of Japheth were the Indo-European peoples. Let's see if I can... Technology. I don't know where my little beamer is. Oh well. They would include the Greeks and the peoples living north to the Black Sea. These groups are not often seen in Bible history, but they are named in some prophecies. They also include Magog, who settled in the far north of Europe and became the Russian peoples. Magog figures in end times prophecy in the book of Revelation, and not a very positive end time prophecy. From Japheth also came the Germanic peoples and others of Western Europe, including the French, the Spanish, and the Celtic settlers. The people of India also came from Japheth's family. The descendants of Ham are the peoples who migrated to Africa and the Far East. They moved into southern Mesopotamia, including Egypt and part of the Arabian Peninsula. Canaan refers to the people who originally settled in the land we think of today as Israel and its surrounding regions. And by the way, you do have this, you have a map of this in your Bible study this year. About 8 pages in, you have a map of this. Many people believe that the Oriental people descended from the Sinites in Ham's line. Inserted into verse 8 is a reference to Nimrod, a mighty warrior who established the earliest conquering peoples in Babylon and Assyria. The original saying, "a mighty hunter before the Lord," was not a compliment. The idea is that Nimrod was an offense in the face of God. Jewish legends say that Nimrod proclaimed this: "Depart from the judgment of the Lord and adhere to the judgment of Nimrod." Eventually, the people under his influence no longer trusted God, but rather in their own cleverness and abilities. That was the attitude with which Nimrod tried to convert the whole world. Finally, the sons of Shem